Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel, the channel that helps believers use biblical discernment in all aspects of life. Today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about a recent tweet I did that maybe I wasn't clear enough, maybe I was. That's not really the point. The point is, I think, with everything going on recently, just not the big news stuff, but just stuff in people's lives that I know personally, I wanted to go through a few things and really talk about them in regards to prayer and how Christians should react to things, right? So let's go over to the screen. So here's the tweet specifically, and I kind of want to walk through it because I think it's rather important, right? So whenever something happens, right? So cancer, sickness, national tragedy, personal tragedy, family tragedy, whatever it is, the question is like, what should we do, right? What should be our first response? And I think a lot of our responses are to react immediately, because that's what we want to do. We want to react immediately. So my contention is this, and I want to give some examples, but I want to go through this first, and then we're going to end on scripture. It won't be a very long video for you, but hopefully it's helpful. So my contention is prayer, despite what some so-called Christians say, and the reason I called them so-called Christians is because they look down on prayer, but it is the only reasonable thing to do when tragedy occurs. Now, the reason I say, prayer is the only reasonable thing to do when tragedy occurs is because it centers you, right? This is what I say underneath. Prayer actually reminds you who is in control, that being God. God is the one that is in control. He's in control of everything. Because when tragedy strikes, the first thing that you realize is that you don't have a grip on anything. I've got a couple examples I'll cover here in a minute. But prayer helps you realize who's in control. And you realize really quickly, it's not you. Prayer also helps you realize where your salvation comes from. Once again, God comes from Christ. Because in these tragic situations, you are not going to be able to save yourself, right? There are going to be moments in tragic situations where when that tragedy occurs, you're going to realize really quick, you don't have the resources, you don't have the knowledge, you don't have whatever it is that's going to fix that problem right then. And tragedy helps helps us realize that all people need Christ. Because in those moments, and I'll give you a few examples here in a minute, it helps us realize that we're all sinners in need of Jesus. So whenever this happens, right, when tragedy occurs, whatever that tragedy is, what's going to end up happening is that you're going to either try to react to fix it immediately, like that's going to be your go-to, or you're going to run to the Lord. Those are going to be the two reactions that you have. You're either going to run to the Lord or you're going to go try to fix it. Now, there are some exceptions, and we'll talk about those here in a minute. But what prayer does is that it centers our hearts so that when we do make those decisions, we make Christ-honoring decisions and actions. But why are we making those? It's because we understand that we're not the Savior. We're not in control. We realize all of that. We realize that nothing is in our grasp that we're going to be able to figure out. There's a lady I go to church with. She was at church Sunday afternoon. She has a heart attack, or a mild heart attack. She goes to the hospital, finds out there's a whole lot more wrong with her. Now, there's already been stuff wrong with her already as far as health-wise, and she finds out that, another thing is going on. Now, she could have, and she'll tell you in the past she has, immediately ran to, trying to figure this out, trying to fix everything herself, trying to do whatever she can in her power to just get everything back on track. She'll tell you, though, now, the most productive thing she can do is pray, realize who's in control, that being God, realize where her salvation comes from, that being Christ, and realizing that in this moment, even in this suffering, she is a witness to who Jesus is and what he's doing. Now, she could try to control all of the things herself. She could have made a list. Oh, I really need to have a better diet. I've got to figure out how to pay for all this. I've got to call everybody and tell them what's going on. Or she could pray and understand who's really in control. All of the other stuff's going to come later. But like I said, prayer actually helped her Sunday center herself so that she made Christ-honoring decisions in the midst of what was happening. There's somebody else I know, actually another lady at my church. It was Tuesday. She passed out. Now, a little bit of backstory here is that before this, she's had cancer in the past, breast cancer in the past. It had went away. She found out 2 weeks ago that it had come back. And so she's out shopping with some friends on Tuesday, passes out, goes to the hospital, and what happens is she realizes really fast that she could panic or she could pray. She could try to figure this all out herself, or she could go to the one that is her salvation, that is in control. And that's what she did. There's a lot of situations we're going to have in which you're going to want to control it right away. You're going to want to have all the answers. You're going to want to have an action plan in place. There is time for, like I said before, decisions and actions. Of course there are. In the case of the lady with the heart attack, there's going to have to be some decisions made, some action plans happening. For the lady I know that passed out, there's going to have to be some decisions and actions made. All in all, though, guess what? The doctor said they have no clue why she passed out. So she has to really rest in the reality of God's in control. He's her salvation. And through this suffering, she can either glorify him or she can, try to get everything, try to figure it out all herself. And she could sit there and worry about why she's passing out. She could sit there and worry about maybe the cancer's back, or she could make decisions and actions based on the fact that she knows who Jesus is. She knows God's got it under control, and she's going to make Christ-honoring decisions. I got a lot of stories like this, but I'm not going to take your whole day up. The point is that tragedy will happen. Events will come up that you don't know what's going on, and you're going to want to just jump into action, man. You got a plan. You know all the answers. You know what's going on, and you're going to want to do that. What I would encourage you to do is go to prayer first if you're a believer. See, the reason I call so-called Christians is because they want to do the action plan first. They got all the answers, man. They know all the things that need to happen. They got a whole list for you. They don't think you need to go to prayer though. Like, we don't need to do that. We'll do that after. I want to end on this verse real quick. It's actually from Philippians chapter 4. And it says this, Philippians chapter 4, starting at verse 2. I entreat Euodia and entreat Cynthia to agree in the Lord. Yes, I ask you also, true companions, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel, together with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. So here's the part I really want to look at. The Lord is at hand. So what should you do? Do not be anxious about anything. Okay, great. Don't be anxious about anything. Then what? But instead of being anxious, right? So this is what the but is for. Instead of being anxious, instead of doing that, in everything in prayer and supplication, be thankful with thanksgiving. Let the requests be made known to God. So instead of being anxious, because you could be, but because you know the Lord is at hand, you don't need to be anxious. Why? Because you should be rather putting everything in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your requests be made to the Lord. Why? Because he's in control. Verse 7, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guide your heart and your mind in Jesus Christ. Like, don't, don't let that part slip by. The Lord is at hand, so you shouldn't be anxious about anything, but rather, with prayer and supplication, with thankfulness, let your requests be known to God. And what's going to happen? And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. Here's the thing. When tragedy happens, you're gonna be anxious just automatically. Paul, when he's under house arrest in Rome, writing this letter to the Philippians, could easily be anxious about how this is all going to end. But he, living by example, telling the Philippians, don't be anxious, but rather in prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to the Lord. And what's going to happen? The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding. It's not going to make sense to people outside of Christianity. The fact that you run to God first isn't going to make sense to them. And what's going to happen? The peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will what? Guard your heart and your mind. That peace is going to guard your heart and your mind. Because your heart and your mind are going to want to be anxious. Right? The lady that I know that had a heart attack Sunday afternoon, her heart and mind want to be anxious because she doesn't know if she's going to live another day. The lady I know that might have breast cancer coming back could be anxious because she doesn't know how much longer she's got. She barely beat it the first time. But rather, what we see in the scriptures, and this is just one verse, is that instead of being anxious, take everything in prayer and supplication with thankfulness to God. And when you do that, he says, you will have peace from God, which surpasses any understanding outside. Like, the unbelievers just aren't going to get it. Because your peace comes from God. You know where your salvation comes from. You know who's in control. So now that you know who's in control, you know where your salvation is secure in, who your salvation is secure in, Jesus Christ, you can then make decisions that are Christ honoring. And this is why it's important to go to prayer first. This is why it's important in any tragedy to go to God in prayer first. It's the only reasonable thing to do. Go to him in prayer. And in that prayer, knowing that he's in control, knowing that he's over all things, knowing that where your salvation comes from, then with that knowledge, instead of just reacting, with that knowledge, you can make well-meaning, good, Christ-honoring decisions in the midst of tragedy. So whatever it is, take it to Christ in prayer. It's going to be incredibly beneficial to you.